Chapter 59. Family. Scarlet had many ideas about what hell would ultimately be like when the time came for her to die. She had considered that it would perhaps be an endless abyss of fire and ash that would burn at immortal flesh until the end of time itself, with her only company being the agonized wails of fellow damned souls. She had pondered, alternatively, that maybe it would be more personal, that she would be forced to endlessly confront her misdeeds and mistakes over and over, until the weight of her guilt made her mind snap. When Crystal had first been born, she had decided that hell was, without a doubt, an empty room that she would be trapped in with a crying baby that just would not shut up. That perception hadn't lasted very long. Then, when Crystal died, hell had become any world where her daughter was no longer alive. With all of that in mind, Scarlet was understandably confused when hell turned out to be a nice, comfortable bed with a distinct lack of pain. In fact, the extent of her discomfort was a general stiffness and soreness that one would associate with lying still for a long time. Plus, she was thirsty and hungry, but that was more of a footnote, really. Scarlet cracked her eyes open with a quiet, bewildered groan. She was tucked into a very nice bed in a room that appeared to have been chiseled by hoof out of stone. A green cluster was attached to the ceiling, providing gentle, emerald illumination. Various shelves and compartments were dug into the walls, each one stocked to the point of bursting with medical supplies.
"Am I alive?"
Scarlet asked in a dry rasp. She racked her brain, trying to recall what had happened. Everything up until her point-blank artillery blast was clear, but beyond that, it became fuzzy, to say the least. She knew the battle had carried on for quite some time, and she knew she had sustained increasingly grievous wounds as the ordeal progressed. She vaguely recalled hearing the voices of Lenz and Primrose, but after that, nothing. Her eyes darted down to her body, hidden beneath the blankets. She went to light up her horn and lift them to get a look at the damage, but stopped when a sharp throb of pain stabbed through her skull. She inhaled sharply through clenched teeth, her eyes screwing shut in pain. She took a few deep breaths. Magic exhaustion. She had felt it enough in the past to recognize the sensation. Grimacing and groaning, she tried a different approach, lifting the blanket instead with her hoof. To her surprise, the fur on her chest and forelegs was noticeably thinner compared to the rest of her, indicating that it was still growing back after her artillery spell burnt it all away. The rest of her body was covered in thick bandage wraps with irregular blots of dark crimson.
"What the hell happened?"
she asked after a moment of bewilderment. She allowed the blanket to drop and closed her eyes, trying as hard as she could to pick out any more details. Sadly, her mind refused to yield its secrets, leaving her with more questions than answers. What had happened after she blacked out? Was Silence still on the loose? Were Primrose and Lenz all right? What about the Griffin attack? So many questions assaulted her mind, each one draining her already limited mental strength more and more. Eventually, it all became too much, and she drifted back into a restless slumber. Scarlet drifted in and out of consciousness for what felt like ages, and each time felt almost like she was repeating the initial awakening. Confusion, thought, the struggle to remember, and the onslaught of questions that left her emotionally and mentally drained until her own exhaustion lulled her back to sleep. Every once in a while, she could have sworn she could hear a two-toned voice saying things when her eyes were closed, but she could never make out the words. The pattern at last changed after what felt like the millionth time. Scarlet grimaced and slowly opened her eyes to the sight of a vibrant pink changeling mare with ruby red eyes standing over her. She was humming a little tune to herself as she worked, and Scarlett soon realized that the mare was pulling her bandages away.
Okay, looking good.
She mumbled to herself.
Bleeding has stopped, fur's growing back. Bit of atrophy, lot of scarring, but that's to be expected.
Scarlett blinked, not quite sure what to do or say in this scenario. A few seconds passed where the changeling turned, drifting the blood-soaked bandages into a nearby wooden bin for disposal. That done, she turned back and pulled Scarlett's blankets back up to tuck her in. It was then that the changeling's gaze met Scarlett's. She let out a surprised yip, like a startled puppy, and sprang back with a buzz of her wings. Scarlett blinked again before taking a breath. The changeling took a moment to calm down before offering her a cheerful smile.
Oh, you're awake,
she said. Scarlett slowly pushed herself up into a sitting position. She grimaced in pain as she went, her body complaining with a series of aches and pains.
Yeah, I am,
she acknowledged with a dumbfounded nod. She lifted up a hoof and turned it over a few times, still not entirely sure any of this was real.
Where am I? What happened to me?
The changeling stepped forward and placed a hoof on Scarlett's shoulder to gently nudge her back into a lying position.
It's okay. You're in the Central Healing Hive. You had a very close call, Miss Frost,
she said. She gave Scarlett a tender smile.
You were severely burned. Your muscles had sustained intense damage, and you'd been stabbed through the back with a wing blade.
Scarlett's eyes widened.
Stabbed through the back?
She asked, a hoof wandering up to feel at her chest. Now that she thought about it, there was a noticeable mark on her chest. It tingled with a distant phantom pain, and she grimaced.
I don't really remember that. It all gets fuzzy after a point.
The changeling nodded.
That's to be expected. You were halfway through death's door when Lady Flurryheart reached you.
Scarlett turned to the changeling.
Flurryheart saved me?
The changeling nodded cheerfully.
She sure did, although she didn't do it alone. You really have Primrose and Sharp Lens to thank. They lent Flurry as much energy as they had to save you, and it was just barely enough to bring you back from the brink. You were still in critical condition for several days, but with some time and a lot of effort, I was able to fix you the rest of the way up.
Scarlett stared at the changeling for a few seconds, before reaching a hoof up to her chest to hover over her heart. She turned her head to hide her face behind her mane, her lips tugging up into a warm smile.
Primrose. Lens. They did all that for me?
She asked, if only to hear the words again.
They did,
the changeling replied with a grin.
You're a lucky mare, Miss Frost. The love those two have for you has been palpable every time they came in to check on you.
Scarlett took a deep breath and let it out, her smile growing. She should have known. Lens was a stubborn stallion, and Primrose had a heart that was far too big for her little chest. If ever there was a pair of ponies to break all the rules and save a mare who was beyond even a goddess's power to save, it would be those two, wouldn't it? She lifted her eyes to the changeling again.
What about Silent Edge? Or the Griffin attack? What happened to them?
She asked. The changeling shifted on her hooves, an uncomfortable grimace on her face.
Well, the attack was successfully stopped by Hraesvelgr and Lady Flurryheart. I'm not sure who this Silent Edge is, but I can only assume that he was taken down too. We suffered pretty heavy losses, though, and the entrance is having to be completely rebuilt.
Scarlett let off a quiet sigh.
I see. You have my condolences.
The changeling shook her head, her smile returning.
Thank you, miss, but we all knew something like this was going to happen someday. It was only a matter of time before Sanctuary was discovered,
she said before her horn lit up with a soft green glow.
Now, hold still, please.
Scarlet did as instructed as the changeling ran a few spells over her, no doubt scanning for any leftover damage. After a few minutes, the magic ended and the changeling beamed.
Well, it looks like you're ready to be up and about, Miss Frost. Just try and take it easy. You've been healed, but your muscles and magic are gonna be pretty weak after all that time without use. Go slow and steady, and rest whenever you need to. And if anything starts hurting again, you come right back and see me immediately. Got it?
Scarlet nodded and slowly pulled herself off the bed. Just as the changeling had said, her muscles were stiff and sore, and she could tell already that she was far from where she had been before. She could tell that her magic was in similar straits, remembering how she hadn't even been able to lift her bed sheets when she had first woken up. Still, weak was better than dead, she supposed.
Thank you,
she said.
What's your name?
The changeling held a hoof to her heart and bowed her head.
My name is Colleen. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Frost.
Scarlet hesitated for a moment before smiling. She mirrored Colleen's bow with one of her own.
The pleasure is mine, Colleen. I do believe I owe you my life.
Colleen shot up with a tiny blush forming on her already pink cheeks. She gave off a sheepish giggle.
No, you really don't. Again, Lens and Primrose are the two who really deserve your thanks. I'm just a medical drone doing my job.
Scarlet rolled her eyes.
Yes, and your job was to save my life.
Well, yes, but...
Scarlet chuckled and gave a shake of her head.
Oh, just take the compliment, damn you,
she said lightly before meeting Colleen's gaze again.
Now, do you know where Primrose and Lens are? I'd like to see them.
Colleen was quick to compose herself. She cleared her throat and nodded towards a hole in the wall.
Oh, they should be by the entrance of Sanctuary. They came by this morning to tell me where to find them if you woke up. I can show you the way if you'd like.
Scarlet smiled.
Yes, I'd like that very much.
Scarlet couldn't help but wince from time to time as Colleen led her through the streets of Sanctuary, in equal parts due to the onset of tiredness and the unfortunate sights around her. Many buildings, even this far in, had suffered some small amount of damage, with stray bits of rubble and dried bloodstains here and there. For the most part, however, the locals seemed none the worse for wear. The mood had dropped, yes, but something was counteracting the general air of depression Scarlet would expect to see in the aftermath of a battle like that. Many changelings were actually smiling as they went about their day. Nymphs that went scampering by visibly had a spring into their steps. In general, there was an almost electric buzz of enthusiasm about something that she was, as of yet, unaware of.
Say, Colleen,
she asked as they stepped into the entrance chamber.
Yes, Miss Frost?
Scarlet waved a hoof dismissively.
Oh, just Scarlet is fine,
she corrected before looking around.
I'm curious. Why is everyone so happy?
Colleen tilted her head.
What do you mean?
Scarlet looked over at one set of changelings. They were busy rebuilding a collapsed home, but the looks on their faces were alight with eager excitement.
I've seen more than a few towns in the aftermath of a large-scale battle,
Scarlet began, a small pit of guilt forming in her chest. She discarded it for the moment.
Most of the time, the locals would be downcast from the event. Things would be quiet and somber, as everyone dealt with the destruction and the loss of life. But here, everyone seems excited about something.
Colleen looked around for a moment, before a look of comprehension dawned on her face.
Oh, that! Well,
She turned back to Scarlet as they reached the tunnel that led outside.
Lady Flurry announced this morning that the lamp is going to be open today. Twilight Sparkle and all of her friends are finally coming back into the world.
Scarlet's ears perked up, and she looked back to Sanctuary once again. Now it made sense. It had suffered a horrible tragedy, yes, but it was immediately being followed up with the fulfillment of an ancient promise, one that, with any luck, might finally begin to make their lot in this vast, broken world just a little better. She smiled.
I see. I'm glad then that they have something to smile about. It's hard to find joy so soon after a tragedy like this.
Speaking from personal experience?
Colleen deduced quietly. Scarlet's smile faded.
Yes.
I won't ask.
Colleen said with a raised hoof and a gentle smile.
Anyway, Lens and Primrose should be just up the hill to your right when you step outside. I think you know the way from here, yes?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Scarlet thanked. She gave Colleen a nod before turning to make her way down the tall, cavernous tunnel. She saw the light at the end, and for a brief moment, she toyed with the notion that maybe this was where she was going to step into hell. She managed to chase away the thought with a short laugh, however. She was alive. It was time she started acting like it. She stepped out into the warm light of the afternoon sun, and her muscles began to relax. There wasn't a cloud in sight, and while the damage to the orchards was still plainly evident, the rest of the valley was the very picture of natural beauty. Flowers were blooming all across the scene, gently wavering in the breeze. A few petals drifted through the air, swirling around before vanishing into the distance. Scarlet turned to the right, spotting a natural trail formed into the mountainside, heading up at a steep angle. Grimacing, she set off, taking it slow and steady so as to not upset her abused muscles any further. She had to stop and rest several times on the way, and the journey took several minutes longer than it would have if she had been at full strength. But at long last, she reached the top. The trail widened out into a widened bluff that offered a breathtaking view of the entire valley. She could see it all from here, from the burnt-out orchards, to the sparkling water of the lake, to the very spot where Spike had first brought them in. She paused for a second to soak it in, taking a deep breath. She lowered her gaze. There were 2 ponies up ahead, sitting side by side in front of a gravestone. Her heart fluttered in her chest, a smile gracing her lips. Sharp Lens and Primrose, in her pony form, were staring down at the grave, speaking to one another in hushed whispers. The stallion had a foreleg draped over the foal's back. She stared at them for several seconds, committing the image to memory. How the blue sky stretched on endlessly before them, how the clouds came together to perfectly frame them in the light of the sun, how the drifting petals of the flowers below drifted by. It was awe-inspiring and instilled a sense of peace that Scarlet hadn't felt in a long, long time. With a feeling of contentment she hadn't felt in months, Scarlet slowly approached the filly and stallion. They turned to face her as she drew near, and Primrose's eyes lit up with joy.
Scarlet!
She cried out, tearing out of Lens's embrace and launching herself against Scarlet in a tight hug. Scarlet grunted, falling to her haunches. Her muscles complained vehemently about the sudden impact, but she ignored them and returned to the hug, scooping Primrose up and cradling the filly tight against her chest, right over her heart.
Prim. Oh, Primrose,
she whispered, tears of joy in her eyes. She leaned back after a second to look down into Primrose's eyes.
Thank the 5. You're okay,
she whispered, reaching a hoof up to caress Primrose's cheek. Prim leaned into the touch.
So are you.
She whispered, her own eyes shimmering.
I was so worried about you. I thought you were gonna die.
What? And leave you all alone with him?
Scarlet asked, shooting Lens a teasing look.
Not a chance.
Lens pouted, and Scarlet couldn't help but notice the distinct lack of his glasses and the scars that now ran across his face.
Scarlet, do you have to? Lens, after everything we have been through recently, you will let me have this.
The stallion groaned, then shrugged his shoulders. Fair enough. He relented before drawing closer. He joined Scarlet and Primrose in their group hug, resting his forehead against hers. It's good to have you back. Scarlet smiled. With only a moment of hesitation, she leaned forward and pressed her lips against his in a tender kiss. She heard him inhale sharply through his nose from the sudden movement, but he was quick to gather himself and return the kiss with just as much passion and energy. When she pulled back, she snickered at the intense blush that was now covering his face.
Oh, I am glad to hear it.
Primrose gave off an adoring coo at the display of affection. She snuggled closer to Scarlet, burying her face into the unicorn's chest fur. Scarlet held her closer, taking a moment to cherish the warmth that the filly was offering her. Another breeze washed by from the edge of the bluff, drawing her attention to the grave. Her heart sank when she saw the epitaph chiseled delicately into the stone's surface. Here lies Scalera, beloved mother. May her legacy shine on forevermore. Scarlet looked down at Primrose, and she knew from the foal's pained expression that she could feel Scarlet's own dropping mood. Her ears lowered, and she gave off a quiet sigh. Without a word, she leaned down to plant a small kiss on Primrose's head.
I'm sorry about your mother,
she whispered.
I truly am.
Primrose was quiet for a few seconds. She looked back to the gravestone and shook her head.
It's all right. I miss her, but I'll live,
she said, managing a tiny smile.
Besides, she's not really gone. She's right here. And she can watch over all of us from here. And she wouldn't want me to stay sad. So I won't. I'll smile and smell the roses, like you taught me to.
Scarlet's smile slowly returned. She reached down and gently pet Prim on the back of the head.
That's my girl,
she whispered. She lifted her head to the gravestone one more time and closed her eyes. After a few seconds, she smiled softly and returned her attention to the two ponies she had in her hooves. The trio fell into a companionable silence after that, embracing each other and allowing the cool mountain air to wash over them. The sound of birds singing far off in the distance reached their ears, lending their aimless melody to the already serene atmosphere. Primrose suddenly held Scarlet tighter, and when she spoke, her voice was low and timid, a reflection of the shy whisper she had first used in Scarlet's cellar all that time ago.
I don't want you to go.
Scarlet blinked in surprise.
Huh? What are you talking about?
Lens caught her attention with a small sigh. I told her about your plan to continue to love her shade, he said after a moment. I thought she'd want to know.
Please don't leave,
Primrose asked quietly, her lips trembling.
I want you to stay. Please stay.
Scarlet stared down at her for several long seconds, her heart twisting in her chest. She turned to Lens, then looked up at the sky, her mind waging a war within itself. She did still want to get to Lover's Shade, get word to her mother about everything that had happened. But it was a long journey to make alone, especially in her condition.
My place is with my family,
she said, the war in her mind raging harder for a few seconds before one side finally won out over the other. She looked back down to the pony and changeling before her, seeing the disappointment in their eyes. She hesitated for a second, then reached out to lift Primrose's chin so they were eye to eye.
And luckily for me, my family is right here.
It was like someone flicked a switch. Primrose's eyes widened, and she let out an elated squeal before throwing herself against Scarlet again and hugged her tight.
Thank you, Scarlet!
Primrose cried out, burying her face into Scarlet's shoulder.
Thank you, thank you, thank you!
Scarlet returned to the embrace and let out a small laugh. She looked past the happily cheering foal and met Lenz's gaze. He appeared surprised, but after a moment he smiled back at her and drew closer.
Thank you, Scarlet. So what happens now?
He asked quietly. Before Scarlet could answer, the roar of Spike pierced the air from the mountain, long and loud. As soon as it did, a wave of blue magic came rushing out of the cave, washing over Scarlet and the entire valley behind her, carrying with it an odd sense of calm. A moment later, the nearby orchard, where drones had been working to clean things up, began to cry out and cheer, birds flying into the air to dance in the sky.
It's open,
Primrose whispered quietly, her eyes going distant. Her smile grew smaller but no less sincere.
Lamp. It's finally open.
Scarlet looked back towards the cave entrance. Starlight Sparkle and her friends had been released then, had they? If so, the days ahead were sure to be more than a little interesting. The world was going to start changing soon, for better or for worse. She could feel it.
But that is not a story for us to get involved in,
she decided after a moment. She met Lenz's gaze one more time.
What happens now, Lenz? Primrose? Is we three settle down here and finally live that quiet, simple life we've all been wanting?
Lenz leaned into her side at that, draping a foreleg over her shoulders. I think I like that plan.
Me too,
Primrose chirped, snuggling up between the two ponies. Scarlet smiled at the two of them before closing her eyes and taking a deep breath.
A simple life,
she whispered before falling quiet and allowing the warmth of her new family to finally melt the ice that had long encased her heart. She lifted her eyes to the gravestone.
I will take care of her in your stead,
she thought, hoping that wherever Scalera's spirit was, it could hear her vow.
I swear it on my life. I will protect her and love her as if she were my own. I will make sure your sacrifice will never be in vain, Scalera. As one mother to another, you have my word.
It was a strange thing. As Scarlet ended that thought, she could have sworn the winds on that cliffside turned and shifted, as if in response to her words. It was probably just her imagination, but she couldn't help but think that the wind was saying something.
Thank you.